Hey, everyone out there in YouTube land, Dan here from Geekcast Radio, doing something a little bit different. This time I'll be talking about my Age of Apocalypse collection. Recently I was going through my CLZ app and categorizing all my books, and I thought, hey, why not pick out some collections where I'm not going to go in detail review these books, but just kind of show you what I own. I'll be honest, I don't have the most impressive collection in the world, but there are some bits that I think are somewhat interesting. The one being Age of Apocalypse, where I think I own pretty much every piece of this story and its miniseries, its one-shots. Here you see two books. You have Age of Apocalypse. This was the one-shot that started the 10-year miniseries that kind of celebrated its 10-year anniversary. And then X-Men Alpha. That book launched the Age of Apocalypse books, but it actually began before that in the pages of X-Men Legion Quest number 4. This was part of the regular X-Men book. And this, we saw Legion, who is the son of Charles Xavier, go to the past to try to kill Magneto, to stop him from doing all of his evil deeds. This was before Charles Xavier formed formed his team. This was back when they were still friends, and it didn't happen. What ends up happening is Charles Xavier sacrifices himself, and he is killed, which changes the world forever. The X-Men are not formed. His dream kind of dies on that day, causing the world to be forever changed, and leading into what we now know as the Age of Apocalypse, because that mission failed. Even the X-Men Animated Series did a 2-issue run on this story as well that took influence from this. Told a different story, but certainly took a lot of inspiration from that world. I'm actually going to begin with this miniseries that came out 10 years after it was launched. And this was done, as you see on the title, by Yoshida. And kind of an interesting story behind that, in the sense of that's not a real person. Some people may already know the story, as it was very publicized at the time. This 6-issue miniseries was written by C.C. Cebulski, who is the current editor-in-chief at Marvel, but he wrote this under a pseudonym. At the time, Marvel was doing a lot of manga-inspired books, and he took on that name, including writing this and a few others. So I know that caused a lot of controversy at the time, and some people still kind of find that it was a very shady move. But just kind of interesting knowing that the person who is now really running the show in Marvel is now writing, now the person that wrote this miniseries. So it makes me wonder if they would ever return to Age of Apocalypse. I mean, they recently did somewhat in the Secret Wars series with Battle World. But this series, what it covered, sorry for the awful glare, was this continued the story. What we saw was what we thought was a world ending didn't actually end, and Magneto is kind of named the savior of the world, but we find out perhaps that was not the case. Perhaps there was a secret that really the person that saved the world was someone else, and it kind of goes through that for the 6 issues. We see that Magneto maybe done some non-so-great things, as the fact that he is Magneto. It was an okay series that introduced some new characters, brought some back that people know and love, like Wolverine from Age of Apocalypse. For blatant cash grabs, or whatever you want to call it, there was worse series at the time. But as someone who was just loved the Age of Apocalypse at the time, I was just happy to see that world revisited. Even had some crossovers with the Exile series then. So. And there's some characters that from the Age of Apocalypse that still exist to this day. With Age of Apocalypse, you didn't really have one book. It wasn't just Age of Apocalypse 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You really revamped all the titles. This Excalibur became Excalibur. Really what they did was they took X and put it in front of a lot of the books. But this followed kind of the Excalibur team. For those that don't know, that's really the United Kingdom, England group, which often has like Captain Britain, Psylocke, Rachel Summers is often part of it. But not only was this a different team with different characters, the world was different. Characters had different costumes. Some characters that were part of the X-Men were part of. This was Juggernaut, but a different version of him. With some of the characters that were X-Men were actually evil. Some of the characters that were evil were X-Men, as often is the case. And one thing also is that Nightcrawler, as you can see, this is a very 90s looking comic, had a very different personality. He didn't have that Christian background. He wasn't the almost monk-like character. He was much more violent. And actually, he has one of my favorite moments of this entire book, which is in this issue, which is why I'm bringing it out, was this moment right here to let you know this is a different type of Nightcrawler. You don't point in his face because he grabs the finger, he teleports, the finger comes with him, but the individual still stands there, wincing in pain. You kind of realize just like how powerful Nightcrawler could be if he just fully unleashed himself. But it was one of the books I enjoyed the most, just because seeing Nightcrawler in that different dynamic. As is the case, most of these series are 4 issues. So was this. It followed Mystique and Nightcrawler were the 2 main characters, and it was kind of weird seeing Mystique and Nightcrawler being on the same page, as is not often the case. But it was pretty good. One of the better examples of it. During this time, most of the actual regular Marvel characters didn't necessarily exist, and their stories were covered in this book with X Universe. And this, as you see on the cover, there's a Hulk-like character. This was Bruce Banner. His Hulk was a little bit different. In this world, we didn't have the Avengers. We didn't have the Fantastic Four, although Ben Grimm and Sue Storm are in this, along with a lot of the other Avengers characters, except they don't have any powers. They're just normal human beings fighting kind of almost like G.I. Joe-esque. As often the case, as we know with Apocalypse, he's all about only the strong survive, and that meant a lot of humans not surviving. And this was only a 2-issue series compared to the rest, which were mostly 4. We can see Matt Murdock, Henry Pym, Sue Storm. They all kind of formed this team, Nick Fury, to fight against that of Age of Apocalypse and his foes. But compared to what they have, they were a little bit more outgunned. It was pretty cool. It made me just wish, reading it, I remember as a kid reeling, how Hulk should be able to kill all these people, but it wasn't like Hulk that was to maybe the power level that we know him. Also, Gambit got his own series, Gambit and the Externals. As you can see, X was a big running theme with this. This didn't really have an analog compared to some of the other ones where, this was X-Men, this was X Factor, but, Gambit was big in the 90s, and what was kind of intriguing about this, we had obviously Gambit and Jubilee, Strong Guy. This also dealt with the Shi'ar, which was kind of cool because, Gambit's, I always think of him more as like a street-level character, even though he is immensely powerful. For some reason, I have 2 of these, but it was kind of cool seeing him in that world, and seeing some of those classic X-Men characters show up in a different complex. It wasn't one of my favorite series out of all of the miniseries that went on, but if you're a huge X-Men fan and a huge Gambit fan, you might like it, just seeing him being the leader of his own team. One of my favorite books, which was probably, in all honesty, not one of the best, was X-Man. And X-Man Nate Gray is that of Cable, kind of. Cable, they have the same genetic makeup, but their stories are different. This is Nate Gray, where he doesn't have the techno-organic virus. He is the son of Scott Summers and Jean Grey, although they didn't necessarily have a child, or Goblin Queen, that's the case with Cable. He was manufactured by Mr. Sinister because he wanted to have a character or have a person that could take out that of Apocalypse, because even though Sinister was working with Apocalypse, he also has his own agenda, as often is the case. X-Man was part of this kind of, they were just like random bandits of people. They're almost gypsy-esque, and he had this relationship with Forge, who was almost like his pseudo-father in a way, who looked after him. And they went up against that of Sinister because Sinister was trying to use him for his own plans. And X-Man was one of the characters that actually continued after this Age of Apocalypse series was ended. Some of the characters came into the regular Marvel universe. He was the one, he has his own title for some time. Him and actually Cable even crossed paths here and there. He even exists today somewhat. I know he died and came back, as often is the case, but he still exists along with Blink, who's currently in the Exiles book that's going on right now. So even to this day, nearly around 20 years now, some of these characters are still with us, which often isn't the case with a lot of these events. A lot of the characters come and go, but X-Men, it's not like X-Men's a major character, but he just pop up now and then. The X-Men obviously had their own books. There was a couple. One of them was the Astonishing X-Men, and I think this was the first time that phrasing was used to describe an X-Men book, but I could be wrong. This followed Magneto's team, and as you can see here too, we also had Sabretooth and Morph. Morph was fantastic. He was great. I think he really became his own in the Exiles book along with Sabretooth. He was part of the X-Men here, where he was, unlike the current Sabretooth, he was more of a good guy. So was Wolverine, but Wolverine was a little bit more on his own compared to some of the other characters. One of the big bads was Holocaust. He was one of the Horsemen of the Apocalypse. He had a pretty cool look to him. I really do like the redesign of Sabretooth. Not all the redesigns hold up. It's a little weird, but I thought of all the redesigns that they had, he was one of the better ones that made a little bit more sense. Rogue played a major part in this. Rogue and actually Magneto had somewhat of a relationship, which has been touched upon in the regular universe here and there. But this kind of followed that X-Men team. Again, this was another 4-issue series. One of the more odd books, but probably one of the more fun ones, was Generation Next. That was more the kid-centric book. This had Colossus and Kitty Pryde. They led this child team of kids that were kind of in the school, the Generation Next, as I said. Much different in style compared to all the other books. This had Sugar Man in it. Was a big bad in this. A lot more. Like you can see, this character here, very different look and style to it compared to most of the other Age of Apocalypse books. It was quite good, especially as a Colossus fan. One of my favorite ones of it. Mainly because it is so different. I think holds up on his own pretty well. Having all these kids kind of trying to live in this world, and Kitty Pryde and Colossus together, always great. Except for when their marriage falls through, I guess. One book that actually followed the bad guys was Factor X. A little bit taking the X Factor and changing it. You can see here Cyclops, Dark Beast, who is supremely sadistic. He's another character that's also popped up and went back into the normal universe. This was Cyclops and Wolverine. As you can see, there are two appendages, or Cyclops lost an eye, Wolverine lost his hand, because Cyclops in this was actually working for Apocalypse, along with his Havoc. They were part of his kind of enforcing group, and this followed them, although he perhaps wasn't as into it as Havoc is. Havoc seems to be just more into being evil than Scott Summers, and that kind of followed their line. This had Dark Beast in it, as I mentioned, who is a super sadistic character, does some really evil things, but really cool. One of the better books too. The back and forth between Havoc and Scott Summers was pretty good. So, also, though, I would say the design of Cyclops with long hair is kind of weird. It's just odd looking at nowadays. Another X-Men book that was going on was The Amazing X-Men. This followed Storm's team, which had Iceman, Banshee on it, Quicksilver, and a lot of the same characters. Iceman in this is different. We know Bobby Drake. He's a little bit more fun-loving type of character. Here, he's more of a beast. He doesn't really talk. But we do see how powerful he is. Abyss is in this, where he can kind of be destroyed and really made into like molecules, but he's able to reform himself. So he just becomes like less and less human. But you also realize how powerful X-Men, or how powerful he can be if he kind of just lets himself go. I'm trying to show you some of examples of that. Where this is probably one of the X-Men series were really good too. As we can see, all the different characters here. I think Bishop was also on this team, but this actually did not have it. Oh, Gargoyle, that was always fun in the days. But we can see just how powerful Iceman is here. He can hold up, but he doesn't really talk. He has a weird conversation to him. When he does talk, it's not the same as we would expect the Bobby Drake of today. He's got a little bit more fractured type of dialogue, but it's still quite good. So that is The Amazing X-Men. There were also some other like X-Men Chronicles that had a bunch of different stories in it. A lot of cool characters. It kind of wrapped up And one thing that I think the Age of Apocalypse story had that did really well, it had a gigantic scope to it with all these different series going on concurrently. It did feel like an entirely different world. Like if you never read an X-Men book, just picked it up, you would just think this was the normal way things would go. So I thought that was kind of a cool way to do it. And you also had Weapon X, which was the series that followed Wolverine and Jean Grey. Of course, Wolverine got his own book. This had huge ramifications in the ongoing story because he was actually helping out the group of individuals that were trying to take out that of Apocalypse. They were on this kind of suicide mission to finally end him. And as it's Wolverine, so of course he played a major role in the story. And then kind of the last bits we had, like Age of Apocalypse: The Chosen, which they don't do this as much as they used to. It's kind of a categorizes a lot of the different characters, gives you just kind of biographies of them. And I kind of missed this because it was kind of, I guess we don't really need this nowadays because we have Wikipedia. But, when you didn't, it was kind of just cool to see. Here's the different characters. Here's some information of them. Here's Magneto, Cyclops. So, Havoc, Mr. Sinister. It's kind of cool because you can see all the different designs. Storm. Some of the characters changed more than others. Some of them were pretty much exactly the same. Quicksilver, North Star, and Aurora. They're a lot more evil in this. As I mentioned, Dark Beast was probably the most different. Hank McCoy in this was a lot more tormented. The Four Horsemen here, which was Abyss, Holocaust, Mr. Sinister. Abyss was a great. He legitimately was a character that kind of scared you when he showed up because he was so hard to find. And we see Excalibur, the Human Council, as I mentioned. These are people trying to fight against that of Apocalypse. Weapon X and Jean Grey. I should say it was called Weapon X. He wasn't called Wolverine. Gambit and the Externals. Juggernaut. Or not Juggernaut, that's Colossus. I apologize. And we have Angel, who worked with Avalon. And then Sabretooth and Wildchild. And Bishop, who was one of the few characters that actually, being a time traveler, he knew what the world should be, but no one really believed him. And then Charles Xavier, and this was all, this was Apocalypse at the time, looking at all these different things. But it's kind of a cool way to just wrap up the series. And then the last bit was actually, as you would expect, with Alpha, then you have Omega, that kind of brought it to its end. Well, what we thought was the end, because then eventually it came back, and it's still kind of going on. They had it a little bit with the Secret Empire, or with the Secret Wars, and then with the Exiles, it's still have characters that are there today. So it's a very huge piece of X-Men history, and has some great characters. Some things don't hold up as well. But in the sense of events, in the sense of kind of doing some big and bold storylines, I think this is one of the better examples of it of the time. Now, obviously, it's a different time and place where we don't have the same amount of events as we used to. We don't have an event every year when this was going on. But still, I think it still holds a special place in my heart. I've not gone through and reread a lot of these in some time. I'm kind of afraid to. I'm sure many of them don't hold up as well. And I'm sure nostalgia plays a big part of it. But huge piece. And even if you ever play X-Men Legends, they even had some of the alternate costumes showed up there too. They had a toy line, all that great stuff. So if you're a fan of the X-Men Apocalypse, let me know. What were some of your favorite series of the X-Men Apocalypse line? I mentioned some of mine. I really enjoyed Excalibur, the Amazing X-Men, Astonishing X-Men were some of the best in my opinion. X-Man. Did you hate Age of Apocalypse? Because I know some people didn't like it. They felt it was unnecessary and kind of went on for too long, which is often the case. And how do you rank it up against other big Marvel events like Civil War, Secret Empire, Secret Invasion, or even other X-Men events like the Excalibur song, which happened a few years earlier, things of that nature. Be curious to hear what people's opinions are. Let me know in the comment section below. But I'd just like to thank everyone for taking the time and hearing me ramble. I appreciate anyone that subscribes, watches, likes this video. I know there's a lot of comic book YouTube stuff out there, probably stuff that's much better than mine. So anytime you take, I truly do appreciate it. And as I always say, comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, thanks for watching.